So we've got some great partners here, and I'm going to kind of start on that front end of outreach, and I'll introduce Sean. Sean's our team lead at Search. He works with our outreach teams. There's a couple different outreach teams at Search that make up one big group, and so I'll turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Alexis. Hello, everybody. My name is Sean Quitzau. I'm the supervisor for the outreach team here at Search. And like she mentioned, the outreach team is made up of a few different sub-teams, each with kind of a different piece of the outreach pie. But today I really want to focus on, I'll give you kind of a brief overview of what outreach does and then how outreach has been affected by COVID, because it's had an impact on all of us, both us in the service provider realm and then the clients. So outreach, as she showed on that last slide, is really the first point of contact for individuals who are unsheltered. And so really the goal on outreach is to build a rapport with those individuals, to assess their level of vulnerability. So outreach really most often focuses on those who are most vulnerable, those who are not already connected to services, who are not as likely to come in for services. And so that's really where our focus is most of the time, is on assessing that initial level of need and then working with them on gaining access to housing, health resources, and income if they don't have any. What that often involves is getting individuals the documentation that they need for housing and then kind of moving them along that process. So pre-COVID, outreach really was in the field most days of the week. That's kind of our bread and butter. That's where we want to be, is working with those clients where they are on the streets. Of course, with the impact of COVID, Search had to shut down services temporarily, at least in terms of meeting clients in person. And that had an impact on the way the outreach team was able to deliver services. Like the rest of Search, for at least the first few weeks, all of our meetings were virtual. We were not able to be in the field with our clients. So on the first slide that I show with some of those pictures, you'll see us meeting virtually. I'm trying to make the best of the initial weeks of the shutdown. But after the first couple of weeks, the Search outreach team was called together with some of the outreach teams across the city to meet the need of the individuals living on the outskirts of town. So luckily we have providers like the Beacon and Healthcare for the Homeless that are operating within the downtown area and are able to serve the unsheltered individuals living in downtown. But our focus ended up being on those individuals who did not necessarily have access to food, who did not necessarily have access to the health resources or the screening tools that they needed. And like Alexis mentioned, because they're unsheltered, they are particularly vulnerable and particularly at risk of being negatively impacted by the virus. And so that's really what our outreach focused on, for the first 2 to 3 months. Was getting people screened for symptoms of COVID, passing out health information, and then passing out food and hygiene kits, because many agencies, not just Search, had to either partially shut down or are still shut down to this day because of the impact of COVID. So that really was our focus, was on meeting the immediate basic needs of the people that were on the streets, and then making sure that none of them were displaying symptoms for COVID. And if they were displaying symptoms, getting them connected to that screening process and then those health resources. And I believe our team only really encountered one client on the outskirts of town who seemed to be displaying symptoms. So we screened them for those initial symptoms. We got them connected to a health worker over the phone who did another screening, and then used a taxi to get them transported where they could be tested further. Luckily, that test came back negative, but that's just kind of a quick overview of that testing process, right? When you're meeting somebody in the field and they seem to be displaying symptoms, going through that initial screening and then getting them connected to the testing, and then an eventual quarantine if they do ultimately test positive. So luckily we only had one close call, and it shows that, I think the safety protocols that we've used in terms of using distancing, wearing masks and gloves in the field have helped to keep our clients safe and also keep us safe in the field. So that's really what the first kind of 2 to 3 months focused on with the outreach, during the quarantine period. But luckily, as Search has kind of started to reopen our building on a partial basis, and then also pivot back to our normal case management, that has also allowed the outreach team to get back to our bread and butter, our normal case management of getting people, connected to housing, health and income resources, and assessing that initial level of need. So, with the building reopening, we have started to focus on passing out water and other basic needs items, but also using our front gate of our building as kind of a triage zone. So, because Search is near downtown and a lot of the major encampments, there are a lot of unsheltered individuals in the area who depend on Search for a certain level of case management. And so this is where we have, using our building at a limited capacity, we have assessed that need at the front gate and have opened up client meeting spaces in our building. As you can see with the photos, we've taken great care to make it safe for both our staff here at Search and then the clients that we're meeting in our building spaces. So we have a limited number of spaces to kind of make sure that we don't have too many of the people in the building at one time. And then of course, before we bring anybody into the building, we screen them for symptoms, take their temperature, and then utilize these designated spaces. But so with Search reopening, kind of using all of the knowledge that we've learned up to this point, with the safety protocols, getting back to our normal case management, in a certain way, actually, certain aspects of our outreach and housing work have actually gotten more efficient. So in terms of the housing navigation piece, our outreach team does do some housing navigation, and that work has continued throughout the quarantine period. And we've been able to get back to that work a little bit more as we've gotten back to working in the building. And so here in these photos, you'll see, in the first photo, we have one of our outreach clients filling out a housing application, which is part of the navigation process, kind of, one of the final steps before getting housed. And then in the photo on the right, you see a client that I actually personally navigated from the streets into housing, and that is her moving in. She actually moved in early July. So, I think with outreach, there were some initial challenges. We had to adapt, given the risks associated with COVID. We had to adhere to public health recommendations and safety protocols, but still wanted to meet those basic needs. And then as we've learned through that process and felt comfortable with those new safety protocols working in our building, again, getting back to our normal case management, we have still maintained that momentum around assessing people's needs and getting them connected to housing and income and health resources.